growing up in the 80s as a kid, no one would ever say, why is it important to be studying Russia? And so we had, if you grew up during the Cold War, this was it for global politics. There was like the West and then there was the USSR. And if you were interested in sort of understanding the dynamics of global politics, you had to know something about the Soviet Union because it was a sort of bipolar world during the Cold War. Now in the aftermath of the Cold War, there was, well, so to reflect that fact, right, there was a lot of, over time, government funding that went into supporting studies of the former Soviet Union and Russia in particular. In the aftermath of the Cold War, you saw a drying up both of sort of funding sources that had been available to support academic scholarship, but also, to a certain extent, you saw a sort of drop-off of interest, in some extent, in what was going on, especially in kind of contemporary Russia. There was a big rise in sort of interest in the post-communist transitions, what were happening to all these countries in political science, for example, what happened to all these countries that had been, formerly democracies, formerly non-democracies, formerly communist controlled, what was going to happen to them in the post-communist era. So there's a sort of flourishing of research on this in the political science field. But in general, this sort of, first among equals place that Russia had occupied among scholars during the sort of Cold War period began to diminish. Now, I think in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a recognition that this went too far, right? And you saw among, you would see 6, 7, 8 years ago, op-eds in the New York Times mentioning the fact that we had like a dearth of Russia experts out there in the United States. So the government had made it a priority to make sure that there were lots of people who knew a lot about Russia during the Cold War. That had become less of a priority afterwards, and I think a lot of people began to feel that may have been a mistake. Russia still had played a large role in the world, and we can think about it in terms of Russian history and Russian culture, but of course in terms of contemporary politics. And I think since that, the Jordan Center was founded around that time, I think that people were beginning to sort of realize that. And I think that was part of the appeal that NYU made in trying to get the center established, that we really needed to have students who knew something about Russia, and that it was important to sort of focus on the study of Russia. And I think the events of the last 6 or 7 or 8 years have proved that, even beyond belief, to be correct.